Chapter 13. Dr. Seward's Diary continued. The funeral was arranged for the next succeeding day so that Lucy and her mother might be buried together. I attended to all the ghastly formalities, and the urbane undertaker proved that his staff were afflicted, or blessed, with something of his own obsequious suavity. Even the women who performed the last offices for the dead remarked to me, in a confidential, rather professional way, when she had come out of the death chamber. "She makes a very beautiful corpse, sir. It is quite a privilege to attend on her. It's not too much to say that she will do credit to our establishment." I noticed that Van Helsing never kept far away. This was possible from the disordered state of things in the household. There were no relatives at hand, and as Arthur had to be back the next day to attend to his father's funeral, we were unable to notify anyone who should have been bidden. Under the circumstances, Van Helsing and I took it upon ourselves to examine papers, etc. He insisted upon looking over Lucy's papers himself. I asked him why, for I feared that he, being a foreigner, might not be quite aware of the English legal requirements, and so might in ignorance make some unnecessary trouble. He answered me, I know. You forget that I am a lawyer as well as a doctor. But this is not altogether for the law. You knew that when you avoided the coroner. I have more than him to avoid. There may be papers such as this." As he spoke, he took from his pocketbook the memorandum which had been in Lucy's breast, and which she had torn in her sleep. "When you find anything of the solicitor who is for the late Mrs. Westernia, seal all her papers, and write him tonight. For me, I will watch here in the room, in Miss Lucy's old room tonight, and myself search for what may be. It is not well that her very thoughts go into the hands of strangers." I went on with my part of the work, and in another half-hour had found the name and address of Mrs. Westernia's solicitor, and had written to him. All the poor lady's papers were in order. Explicit directions regarding the place of burial were given. I had hardly sealed the letter when, to my surprise, Van Helsing walked into the room, saying, "Can you help me, friend John? I am free, and if I may, my service is to you." "Have you got what you looked for?" I asked, to which he replied, "I did not look for anything specific. I only hoped to find, and find I have, all that was there. Some old letters and a few memoranda, and a diary new begun. But I have them here, and shall for the present say nothing of them. I shall see that poor lad tomorrow evening, and, with his sanction, I shall use some." When we finished the work in hand, he said to me, "And now, friend John, I think we may to bed. We want to sleep, both you and I, and rest to recuperate. Tomorrow we shall have much to do, but for tonight there is no need of us, alas." Before turning in, we went back to poor Lucy. The undertaker had certainly done his work well, for the room was turned into a small chapelle ardente. There was a wilderness of beautiful white flowers, and death was made as little repulsive as might be. The end of the winding sheet was laid over her face. When the professor bent over and turned it back gently, we both stared at her beauty before us. The tall wax candle showing with sufficient light to note it well. All Lucy's loveliness had come back to her in death, and the hours that had passed, instead of leaving traces of decay effervescent fingers, had but restored the beauty of life, till positively I could not believe my eyes that I was looking at a corpse. The professor looked sternly grave. He had not loved her as I had, and there was no need for tears in his eyes. He said to me, "Remain till I return," and he left the room. He came back with a handful of wild garlic from the box waiting in the hall, which had not been opened, and placed the flowers amongst the others on and around the bed. Then he took from his neck, inside his collar, a little gold crucifix and placed it over the mouth. He restored the sheet to its place, and we came away. I was undressing in my own room when, with a premonitory tap at the door, he entered, and at once began to speak. "Tomorrow I want you to bring me, before night, a set of post-mortem knives." "Must we make an autopsy?" I said. "Yes and no. I want to operate, but not as you think. Let me tell you now, but not a word to another. I want to cut off her head and take out her heart. Ah, you a surgeon, and so shocked. You, whom I have seen no tremble hand or heart, do operations of life and death that make the rest shudder. Oh, but I must not forget, my dear John, that you loved her, and I have not forgotten it. For it is I that shall operate, and you must only help. I would like to do it tonight, but for Arthur I must not. He will be free after his father's funeral tomorrow, and he will want to see her, to see it. And then, when she is coffined ready for the next day, you and I shall come when all sleep. We shall unscrew the coffin lid, and shall do our operation, and then replace all, so that none know, save we alone." "But why do it at all? The girl is dead. Why mutilate her poor body without need? And if there's no necessity for a post-mortem and nothing to gain by it, and no good to her, to us, to science and to human knowledge, why do it? Without such, it is monstrous." For answer, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, with infinite tenderness, "Friend John, I pity your poor bleeding heart, and I love you more because it does bleed so. If I could, I would take on myself the burden that you do not bear. But there are things you know not, but that you shall know, and bless me for knowing, though they are not pleasant things. John, my child, you have been my friend for many years, and yet did you ever know me to do anything without good cause? I may err, but I am man, but I believe in all I do. Was it not for these causes that you sent for me when the great trouble came? Yes, you were not amazed, nay horrified, when I would not let Arthur kiss his love, though she was dying, and snatched him away by all my strength? Yes, and yet you saw how she thanked me, with her own beautiful dying eyes, her voice, too, so weak, and she'd kiss my rough hand and bless me, yes. And did you not hear me swear promise to her, that so she closed her eyes grateful? Yes. Well, I have good reason for all I do and want to do. You have many years trust me. You have believed me past weeks, when there are things so strange that you might have well doubt. Believe me yet a little, friend John. If you trust me not, then I must tell what I think, and that is perhaps well. And if I work, as work I shall, no matter trust or no trust, without my friend trust in me. I work with a heavy heart, and feel, oh, so lonely when I want all help and courage that may be." He paused a moment, then went on solemnly. "Friend John, there are strange and terrible days before us. Let us not be two, but one, that so we work to a good end. Will you not have faith in me?" I took his hand and promised him. I held my door open as he went away, and watched him go into his room and close the door. As I stood without moving, I saw one of the maids pass silently along the passage. She had her back towards me and did not see me, and go into the room where Lucy lay. The sight touched me. Devotion is so rare, and we are so grateful to those who show it unasked to those we love. Here was a poor girl putting aside the terrors which she naturally had of death to go watch alone by the briar of the mistress whom she loved, so that the poor clay might not be lonely till laid to eternal rest. I must have slept long and soundly, for it was broad daylight when Van Helsing waked me by coming into my room. He came over to my bedside and said, "You need not trouble about the knives. We shall not do it." "Why not?" I asked, for his solemnity of the night before had greatly impressed me. "Because," he said sternly, "it is too late, or too early. See?" Here he held up the little golden crucifix. "This was stolen in the night." "How stolen?" I asked in wonder, "since you have it now." "Because I get it back from the worthless wretch who stole it, from the woman who robbed the dead and the living. Her punishment will surely come, but not through me. She knew not altogether what she did, and thus unknowing she only stole. Now we must wait." He went away on the word, leaving me with a new mystery to think of, a new puzzle to grapple with. The forenoon was a dreary time, but at noon the solicitor came, Mr. Marquand, of Holman, Sons, Marquand and Litterdale. He was very genial and very appreciative of what we had done, and took off our hands all cares as to details. During lunch he told us that Mrs. Westrana had for some time expected sudden death from her heart, and had put her affairs in absolute order. He informed us that, with the exception of certain entailed property of Lucy's father, which now, in default of direct issue, went back to the distant branch of the family, the whole estate, real and personal, was left absolutely to Arthur Holmwood. What he had told us so much, he went on. Frankly, we did our best to prevent such a testimony disposition, and pointed out certain contingencies that might leave her daughter either penniless or not so free as she would be to act regarding matrimonial alliance. Indeed, we pressed the matter so far that we almost came to a collision, for she asked us if we were or were not prepared to carry out her wishes. Of course, we had then no alternative but to accept. We were right in the principle, and 99 times out of 100 we should have proved, by the logic of events, the accuracy of our judgment. Frankly, however, I must admit that in the case any other form of disposition would have rendered impossible the carrying out of her wishes. For her, by preceding her daughter, the latter would have come into possession of the property, and, even had she only survived her mother by 5 minutes, her property would, in case there were no will, and a will was a practical impossibility in such a case, have been treated at her decease as under infancy. In which case, Lord Golding, though a dear friend, would have had no claim in the world, and the inheritors, being remote, would not be likely to abandon their just rights for sentimental reasons regarding the entire stranger. I assure you, my dear sirs, I am rejoiced at the result, perfectly rejoiced. He was a good fellow, but his rejoicing at the little part in which he was officially interested of so great a tragedy was an object lesson in the limitations of sympathetic understanding. He did not remain long, but he said he would look in later in the day and see Lord Golding. His coming, however, had been a certain comfort to us, since it assured us that we should not have to dread hostile criticism as to any of our acts. Arthur was expected at 5 o'clock, so a little before that time we visited the death chamber. It was, in so very truth, for now both mother and daughter lay in it, the undertaker, true to his craft, had made the best display he could of his goods, and there was a mortuary air about the place that lowered our spirits at once. Van Helsing ordered the former arrangements to be adhered to, explaining that, as Lord Godalming was coming very soon, it would be less harrowing to his feelings to see all that was left of his fiancée quite alone. The undertaker seemed shocked at his own stupidity, and exerted himself to restore things to the condition in which we left him the night before, so that Arthur came in and such shocks to his feelings as we could avoid were saved. Hey, Abby. 20 people? Wow, okay. Poor fellow, he looked desperately sad and broken. Even his stalwart manhood seemed to have shrunk somewhat under the strain of his much-tried emotions. He had, I knew, been very genuinely and devotedly attached to his father, and to lose him, and at such a time, was a bitter blow to him. With me he was warm as ever, and to Van Helsing he was sweetly courteous, but I could not help seeing that there was some constraint with him. The professor noticed it too, and motioned me to bring him upstairs. I did so, and left him at the door of the room, as I felt he would like some quiet time alone with her. But he took my arm and led me in, saying huskily, "You loved her too, old fellow. She told me all about it, and there was no friend that had a closer place in her heart than you. I don't know how to thank you for all you've done for her. I can't think yet." He suddenly broke down and threw his arms around my shoulders and laid his head on my breast, crying, "Oh, Jack, Jack, what shall I do? The whole life seems gone from me all at once, and there is nothing in the wide world for me to live for." I comforted him as well as I could. In such cases, men do not need much expression. A grip of the hand and tightening of an arm over the shoulder, a sob in unison, and expressions of sympathy dear to a man's heart. I stood still and silent till his sobs died away. Then I said softly to him, look at her." Together we moved over to the bed and lifted the lawn from her face. God, how beautiful she was. Every hour seemed to be enhancing her loveliness. It frightened and amazed me somewhat, and as for Arthur, he fell trembling and suddenly shaking with doubt, as with an ague. At last, after a long pause, he said to me in a faint whisper, "Jack, is she really dead?" I assured him sadly that it was so, and went on to suggest, for I felt that such a horrible doubt should not have life for a moment longer than it could help, that it often happened that after death faces became softened, and even resolved into their youthful beauty. This was as especially so when death was preceded by any acute or prolonged suffering. It seemed to quite do away with any doubt, and after kneeling beside the couch for a while and looking at her lovingly and long, he turned aside. I told him that he must be goodbye, as a coffin had been prepared. So he went back and took her dead hand in his and kissed it, and bent over and kissed her forehead. He came away, fondly looking back over his shoulder at her as he came. I left him in the drawing room and told Van Helsing that he had said goodbye, so the latter went to the kitchen to tell the undertaker's men to proceed with their preparations to screw up the coffin. When he came out of the room again, I told him of Arthur's question. He replied, "I am not surprised. Now I doubted for a moment myself." Drink. We all dined together, and I could see that poor Art was trying to make the best of things. Van Helsing had been silent all dinner time, but when he had lit our cigars, he said, "Lord," but Arthur interrupted him. "No, no, not that, for God's sake. Not at any rate yet. Forgive me, sir. I did not mean to speak offensively, but it is only because the loss is so recent." The professor answered sweetly, "I only used the name because I was in doubt. I must not call you Mr., and I have grown to love you. Yes, my dear boy, to love you, as Arthur.